Morning, church.
Good morning.
Today's gospel is Matthew, 25th chapter, the 14th through the 30th verse. It's also like a man going off on an extended trip. He called his servants together and delegated responsibilities. To one he gave $5,000, to another $2,000, and a third one $1,000, depending on their abilities. Then he left right off. The first servant went to work and doubled his master's investment. The second did the same, but the man with the single thousand dug a hole and carefully buried his master's money. After a long absence, the master of those three servants came back and settled up with him. The one given 5,000 showed him how he had doubled his investment. His master commended him. Good work, you did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant with 2,000 showed up how he had doubled his master's investment. His master commended him. Good work, you did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant given 1,000 said, Master, I know you have high standards and hate careless ways, that you demand the best and make no allowances for error. I was afraid I might disappoint you, so I found a good hiding place and secured your money. Here it is, safe and sound, down to the last cent. The master was furious. That's a terrible way to live. It's criminal to live cautiously like that. If you knew I was after the best, why would you do less than the least? The least you could have done would have been to invest the sum with the bankers, or at least I could have gotten a little interest. Take the 1,000 and give to the one who risks the most, and get rid of this play it safe, who won't go out on a limb. Throw him out into utter darkness. Let the reading of God's word be blessed. Amen.
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 That's better. I'm so sorry.
Oh, praise the Lord.
And now,
Welcome back, Pastor.
we have missed him for the past couple of weeks.
Yes.
We know he had family matters to take care of.
Yes.
And he had blessed us in his words on Facebook.
Yes.
And in our prayer time,
Yes.
he has thought about us.
Amen.
While he was gone, we prayed for him.
Yes, we did.
We prayed for his family.
Yes, we did.
We prayed safe return to us.
Amen.
And God listens to prayer.
Yeah. Thank God.
And so, let me introduce to some of you and reacquaint others
Yes.
with a man who knows no boundaries.
Yes.
Because God gives him no boundaries. Because he knows when God uses him, we all will be blessed.
Amen.
This man has done more for us
Yes.
than any can say. Because he is humble.
Yes.
He has kept things away so that we may be blessed unknowingly.
Yes.
We need this man.
Yes, we do.
We need him so much. He leads us everywhere.
Yes.
He's gone and shown around the country who Liberation United Church of Christ is.
Yes, he has.
He has shown how we have grown with the gospel.
Yes.
He has told of our worship services.
Yes.
He is now part of Everett UCC, our sister church. He blesses them and then comes right back down to bless us.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only, Pastor Durrell Goodwin Moultrie.
Yes. You missed Tito.
Dear God, we thank you so much for your word. We ask you that it be fire in us,
Yes.
fire through us, and fire with us. These things we trust in a living and an alive God whose presence is always made known when we gather together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
The sermon topic today is very simple, and it'll be short and sweet. Stop playing it safe. Stop playing it safe. Now, in the United Church of Christ, throughout our churches, last Sunday and this Sunday, the focus is supposed to be on stewardship It's usually where the pastor or someone, the pastor or leadership team has appointed gets up to talk to you about money and encourages you to give more than you've previously given because something magical about these 2 Sundays should encourage you to do that. Amen?
Yes.
So I'm going to do my obligatory, you should give more money on these 2 Sundays as you think about next year. Amen. Stewardship. I'll focus a little bit more. Stop playing it safe. When Liberation Ministries at the time was founded in 2007, our worship services began at Garfield Community Center, particularly because it was safe. It was a place that we could rent out. We had a set time when we were supposed to be there, when we had to leave, and the price, which I think at that time was $25 every hour we were there, safely fit into the budget and expectations we had of that time. A few weeks after that, a person at the time who was running a community choir suggested that Epiphany Parish just might be a place that we could worship since they were also renting out space to that particular group. And I wish I could tell you that in the immediacy of that, we all at the time, the leadership team, trusted God and ran to Epiphany to sign up, but we had to toggle between playing safe and trusting in God. You see, playing it safe said, I know, let me be very transparent, I know that I have enough money in my check to pay the bill at Garfield Community Center. If nobody else showed up on a Sunday, we would be able to make it through the bill. But what happens if you move to a multi-million-dollar church that says possibly that there's going to be a particular rent and they're not going to let you pay with the Holy Ghost? Come on, somebody.
Okay.
There's going to be an expectation that you might steward something on behalf of that. And so we had to make a decision between playing it safe or charting out a territory that God's vision of who we were might be bigger than our finances or even the membership Liberation Ministries had at that time. Many of you have heard the story about how I drove to Madrona for the first time, newly, freshly minted in Seattle, and had no idea where I was and got lost many, many times. And for those of you who are younger, I was using MapQuest and not my phone. Come on, anybody remember MapQuest? We had to print the directions out, and they were not helping in this neighborhood. So I showed up over 15 minutes late to my meeting with the pastor at the time of Epiphany Parish. Playing it safe. Now, playing it safe told me, boy, go home. You're already over 15 minutes late. How rude and disrespectful would it be to show up to this person who is willing to meet with you all about renting this church, and you show up over 15 minutes late? Playing it safe would have said, the rules suggest that I needed to go back to my office, send an obligatory I'm sorry email, and tell him that this was not the right time. But then another voice that wasn't so safe, some might blame it on the Holy Spirit, said, keep pressing your way, you will find the church. And I kept driving around until I saw a street that I thought was the street, and then ultimately pulled in front of Epiphany, and the rector merely came outside and said, hey, welcome. And I was ready. Well, I'm sorry, because he said, don't worry about it. This is a kind of a screwy neighborhood. It's hard to find exactly where things are if you've never been here. So it's perfectly fine. Rest, take a little bit of a breath, and then let's talk about this church. As the story goes on, there were no limits or boundaries in what God did on that day. Before I left, I talked to the pastor for probably 10 to 15 minutes. The same amount of time it took me to get lost and not make it to the church was the amount of time we spoke, and he asked me these simple questions. The first one, do you have a gospel choir? Do they need rehearsal? Was the second question. Third, do you know what day that is, just in case we need to move something around, because I know that your church probably needs a good singing choir, and they need a place to rehearse. And then fourth, how many set of keys do we need to make?
Wow.
He didn't ask how much money, he didn't ask what exactly we were going to be doing. He merely asked, why were we called to have this church? And then asked, what did we need to make that work? Playing safe, Liberation may still be at Garfield Community Center. Because the vision, and again, what immediately looked like before us, that was as much as we could do. I didn't realize that the church that had the library and everything else was free of charge. So even the $25 that I was trying to squirrel and make sure that we had to pay, the blessing that God had for us didn't have a fee attached to it. So for over 8 years, we worshiped there. And during that time, the thing that I'm privileged to say about our church is probably around after the first year, we decided as a congregation to be tithers to Epiphany. Before a bill was ever given, before an expectation of paying for anything was ever set up, we decided that it was appropriate to be a tither to that church because of the tithe they were giving to us in space. Anybody understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
When somebody blesses you, then you figure out a way. What is my due diligence here? What is my reasonable service in order to be a blessing back to that community? Over the years, we worshiped there for over 8 years until Madrona asked us to come and fellowship with them during a period of reconstruction at Epiphany, and then we've been here for the past almost 3 years worshiping in community with this church. Now, what does any of this have to do with who we are now? Next year, on March 11th, 2018, Liberation will be celebrating our next 10 years celebration. Next year, in 2018, on March 11th, it will be the 11th year after Liberation got started on the exact day that we first worshiped at Garfield Community Center.
Wow.
So here we are 11 years later, worshiping here at Madrona, and the question that I think God has for us as a faith community is, will you continue to play safe? Now, for many of us, we think, well, what are you talking about? Are we really playing safe? Well, when we gather together in the enclosure of these 4 walls, and we're fairly certain that the sermon is going to be inclusive, the choir is not going to sing something crazy, there's going to be no guest minister that's going to come and damn you to hell every other week, you playing it safe. You know pretty much here, people will agree with you, they will support you. Black Lives Matter, women's rights, trans rights, LGBT inclusion. You're going to get that here. We're going to interrogate sexism. We're going to talk about white privilege and white supremacy. We're going to talk about how do you create a more just world. You're playing it safe. Now, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't come to church here because everyone deserves to be able to worship on Sunday morning and feel somewhat comfortable, feel somewhat affirmed. Well, that means this to me. The work that Liberation United Church of Christ is called to do may begin in these 4 walls, but it cannot end in these 4 walls. That means that what we get from our worship and community together is almost like a refueling, so that when you go out into the world, there are little Liberation UCCs burgeoning in each and every one of us, and when people encounter us, as Nicole used to say, you find a welcome home when they interact with you. They find welcome to an inclusive and growing God. They find a missional stretching of what happens here on Sunday afternoon, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and if they so choose to accompany your vision to show up here on Sunday, praise be to God. But most of the people we meet will not. They won't experience the preaching here. They won't necessarily experience the communion here on a Sunday afternoon or any program that Liberation has, but because of who you are and who this church has helped to inform you to be, they will encounter the God that we serve. As we look at the story, there was a problem. Each person received a blessing. One person received a little bit more, and 5,000. Another one received a little bit less than that. And then the third person received this $1,000. They were each told, go out into the world and see what you can do with what you've been given, and then bring it back at the appointed time. The focal point is usually on the person with the $1,000 who said, I'm going to bury it, because I know that when you come back, I don't want to have lost anything that you gave me, so I'm going to make sure that it is safe and secure. Unfortunately, The church writ large is acting like that person with the $1,000. They're acting like the premium on the Holy Ghost is running out, so they need to bury that. They act like the premium on a God that loves everybody. That's a premium, so you need to bury that. Songs and worship that says, invite all of who you are into the place needs to somehow be buried and cautioned away, because if we tell too many people about a loving God, we might run out of love. We might just run out of grace. We might run out of peace. We may run out of welcome. Too many people might come and want some of what we're talking about, so we have to be a little bit more quiet. Stewardship has multiple principles to it. The first one is something that each of us do, but we don't value as much as we should, and it is called the ministry of presence. The ministry of presence. Your physical presence is actually a ministry. Because when someone new walks into this place, like, can I just talk to you? Can we have a real conversation in the stewardship sermon? Baby, if I come to your church and there's 3 people there on Sunday and I'm already afraid, and there are 3 people at your church or 5 people at your church, or there are more visitors at your church than people who actually go to the church, I won't be coming back. One, because I can't get a temperature on who you are as a community. I don't really know what you're about. Every time I come, it's a different group of people. There is no consistency. There's no clarity about that. And so as a person who wants to understand your community, I'm probably not going to make the investment because I'm already afraid to keep showing up. If I take the risk to come the next Sunday, and again, there's a totally different group of people, then my orientation for months is like a merry-go-round. I don't know who to expect. I don't know who's going to greet me. I don't know who I'm going to see unless you know somebody. If you pre-existingly know someone, then you're pretty guaranteed that they might be here, and then you connect with them for a few months and maybe a year, and then you branch out enough to go talk to other people. This is how social beings work, which means the foundation of the church, your first tithe has to be your presence.
Yes.
And you have to know you matter so much so in the furtherance of the vision of this church that you find the space in your schedule to make being here a priority. And you may think, but other people are going to be there. I'm not the liturgist for that day. I'm not the preacher. It doesn't matter. Your presence is a part of the ministry. Somebody's been told that affirming churches never grow. Somebody's been told that they don't even preach the gospel. I mean, I actually met a gentleman this morning who came to my other church and wanted to speak to a preacher, a minister. Someone called of God. And I said, well, I'm the pastor. And he looked at the board and said, Reverend Durango, and I said, no, I need a real pastor. What? I can't talk to you. I need somebody else. And I said, well, what are you expecting from this person? I don't know, but I know it's not you. I need somebody who really believes in the word. I need somebody who really believes in this very conservative thing he just started saying out. And for some odd reason, upon meeting me in the hallway, he knew that I didn't espouse the same doctrinal tenets he needed for that day. And so he said, I have to go. Someone told him that a real pastor only preaches damnation. A real pastor only preaches that there's something wrong with him and there's something he needs to do to fix it, so that's the only way that God is going to love him. A real pastor wouldn't come and say, come on in. You're not really coming to talk about theology. You're coming to talk about loves. Can we talk about that? And that was the point where he said, I gotta go. You're not a real pastor. So when I say your presence is important, I got a chance to interact with him today and maybe show him a little bit something different than what he's expected. But I'm not always going to meet the people that come here.
Yes.
They're going to meet you. And maybe they're going to meet you as soon as the benediction comes and they're racing out of the door because it took every ounce of courage they had to show up today. But you're going to be the person standing out on the stoop and see them and say, hey, you're leaving already? We're so happy to have you here. And you're going to hug them and plant a seed that I may not ever get to see. Sometimes after service, I'm like, what happened to these people? They're gone. And my only prayer is that one of you have tithed into them by sharing just a little bit of the love you received in their life. And they may not ever come back to this particular church. But now they know this particular particular church, this kind of church, is actually available to them. We got another email today from a couple who visited Everett UCC, but they visited Everett UCC because of Liberation UCC. They were searching for welcome and inclusive churches. They found our church. It was a little bit further from where they lived in Marysville, so they looked around and found somehow that this church was connected to that church. And this is what the email said. If this was a safe place, and we were linked to another church, they assumed that other church might be safe because of you. So again, your presence. They probably will never come to this church, but they found a church because of you. Because of your presence, because you exist, because you gather together and worship, because Liberation UCC exists. A couple found inclusive worship in Everett today.
Yes.
That is the ministry of presence. Second, talent. When I founded this church, God never promised me size. God never promised me who would be here exactly. We never got into all of that. But there was one promise that I will never forget. And that promise is that everything you need will always be in the room. Play it safe or believe that. What? Everything you need will always be in the room. Over the 10 years of this church, everything we have needed has been in this room. Our moderators have been in this room. Our grant writers have been in this room. People who know how to care for folks who are struggling have been in this room. People who knew how to balance a budget have been in this room. People who have history of ministry. People who want to sing. People who want to play. People who want to offer up their talents. It's in the room. So my message to you is if you are playing it safe, waiting for 100 more people to share your particular talent, today might be the day.
Yes.
Because God is promising that exactly what we need is in the room, which means that when the people start using it, not only do you elevate the space, but you create space for the person who's supposed to come after you.
Yes.
Elita will not be the only church mother we ever have at Liberation UCC.
Thank you, Jesus.
She is digging a terrain so that someone else might come in alongside of her and then be the church mother when she's moved on to something else.
Yes.
The moderators are not supposed to be the moderator, though they are at this church forever and ever and ever and ever. But Emily paved the way for Nicole. Nicole paved the way for Cole. And now Cole is paving the way for Ruth. And Ruth is already asking who's going to be her vice moderator so she can begin to pave the way for that person. Trish shouldn't be the deacon forever, the head deacon forever. So she should be starting something so that somebody else who joins this church says, where can I begin to serve? And then they find out that there's a deacon board, and then they start working with Trish, and maybe one day they realize they have the time, energy, and capacity to be the head of the deacon group, and then Trish moves on to do other work in the church. We can no longer wait on the mythical people who are supposed to do what we are called to do. Some of us are waiting. I've been told this over the years. Well, when we get a bigger choir, then. When there's already more people, then. When the offering looks like this, then. When Sunday worship is like this, then. And I'm telling you, the time is now. For this day, for this hour. I wish I could tell you that people weren't dying because they believed God hated them, but that would be a lie because people are.
Yes.
I wish I told you that everybody in our purview, in the Seattle, Tacoma, sort of North Seattle shoreline area, I wish they all knew that there was an inclusive worship space, but let me tell you, there are thousands of people who do not. Seattle is one of the fastest growing cities in the U.S., and I can tell you with as fast as the city grows, more people who do not know an inclusive God show up. And so we no longer have the privilege of celebrating our Hamlet. We have to be out telling as many people as possible. And again, I'm not necessarily sold on there needs to be every pew in this church needs to be filled and there should be people out of the door. But when I tell you, when you tell people about something good, and they trust your word, they're going to come and eat at any restaurant you talked about, use the plumber you talked about. They're going to go shop where you told them to go shop. They're going to go buy a car with the car you drive. How dare you not tell them about a God that will love them through it all?
Yes.
When you tell people about that, people will be curious enough to figure out what it is you're talking about. So my first tithe is my presence. My second tithe is actually my talent. A gift that I have that maybe nobody else in this room has. A group of people I'm going to talk to that maybe nobody else in this church is going to talk to. A way of navigating a system that somebody else in this church may not have understood. And then lastly, your financial tithe. I started this church hating talking about money. I mean, I say hate, like hate to the point that it was, you know, those people that you say, I will never say your name again. Money, it was like, I will never speak of it anymore. Many of you who are aware of that time period remember the season of me putting an offering pan at the back of the church door and never referencing that it was there.
Oh my.
And that had its various and sundry blessings and cursings. One of the cursings is, I'll never forget, our first church anniversary, every dime raised had to be put immediately back into the offering because it was the only way we could pay for everything we did to celebrate. Some of which was feeding people in the community. And the very offering we raised had to go back into the bank or else we would have had $0. Here we are 11 years later. 11 years later, with a hard copy letter poll that I just opened today that confirms that we have $40,000 waiting for us.
Yes.
$40,000 waiting for us when we can match it. Now, let me share a little bit about why we have never applied. Playing it safe. Well, we struggle with offering already. Why would we get ourselves into a point where we are saying we are going to raise $40,000 and it will be matched? Why would you do that? Well, you don't do that if you play it safe. Playing it safe would be, well, let's go back over the 3 years. How much money have we raised over those 3 years? Well, maybe let's just shoot for that because we really can't do beyond that. Let's ignore the fact that we don't really talk about offering.
Yep.
We don't really talk about ways in which to invest in the church, and then we don't invite you all to make liberation a priority in your giving. Forget all of that. Let's just say this is all we have had, and this is it. The thing that blessed me most in the letter and on the phone call when I got it, they said the committee decided to give liberation the highest amount awarded, with over a 400% increase in other churches applying, because our team, every time we talked about another church, they kept saying, but what about the Miracle Church? She said, we named your church the Miracle Church because we said if you have been able to survive for 10 years not paying a pastor, barely having enough money for a musician, and paying rent, and feeding the homeless, and doing stuff in your larger community, and blessing the AIDS Housing Alliance in Tacoma, and blessing the Bailey Boucher House, and offering people Thanksgiving meals. Like, how are you doing this lest it be a miracle?
Yes.
And so the committee said to themselves, I mean, a diverse committee of people all over the context of this church got together and said, well, since the Miracle Church has been a miracle, it's time for us to be a miracle for them.
Oh, wow. Amen. Yes.
It's time for us as the larger church to be a miracle for them because we see that they can make something out of nothing. Come on, somebody.
Yes.
And imagine what they might do with an $80,000 operating budget as opposed to offering to offering context. But what does that mean? What it means is that there's a very tangible thing, which is that there's $40,000 waiting for us as we raise the money to be able to accommodate that. Now, is there other options we're going to have? Is there ways in which we're going to be strategic and thoughtful and we're going to get buy-in? Sure. We're going to have things like the Gospel Drag Night and try to raise money to be matched from that. we have decided to not deposit any more of our offering for the rest of the year, and then make sure that we make one major deposit in January, so at least we can start getting some of the impact of the donation. But we will leave a significant amount of that $40,000 on the table unless we are strategic and thoughtful about our giving.
Yes.
What that means is that every household, including my own, will have to be strategic about figuring out how do we sow into the fiscal reality of the church. Now, for some of you, the building is not going to be sexy. Telling you we need to pay rent, okay, great. Telling you, oh, we need to buy this, or we need to get some more programs or paper. For some people, that won't mean anything. I'm not necessarily asking you to invest in that kind of work. What I'm asking you to invest in is the fact that there was a time in this church where we could take over 30 low-income people away for a weekend in a place they never would have been able to go to, sow into their spirituality over 3 days, where they didn't have to worry about where they're going to sleep or what they were going to eat, and that here we're coming up on almost the 10th year anniversary of one of those retreats, and I'm seeing those men repost the picture from 2008 and talk about, would it be a blessing if we could do that again? Some of those people, I don't even know where they have been over the past 10 years, but they're resurfacing because this church made an impact on them over almost 10 years ago, and they are craving for it to awaken again in their life. Mm-hmm. I sat with a young man 2 weeks ago over dinner, and he said to me, Pastor, I have a journal that Liberation gave me at a retreat when I was 21 years old. I call it my blessing journal. Whenever I really need God to move, I know that if I write in that journal that was prayed over by Liberation, it always manifests in my life.
Wow.
So recently, I needed to be free from drug addiction. And I went to treatment after treatment, but then I remembered I needed to write it in my Liberation journal. Come on! And I wrote it in the journal, and I believe that the prayers of the people of the church will still be with me from the time I was 21 to the time that I am now. I think he's 29. He said, I work on Sundays, so I can't get there, but I want you to know I follow everything that happens at Liberation, and now I'm clean and I'm sober for right now,
Wow.
and I believe I'm going to stay that way.
Wow.
Because I wrote it in the journal. Do you hear what I'm saying? So when you think about, well, what does our church really do? And if I really invested in this thing, what will that mean? And how can I calculate? You can't. You can't calculate how many people have been touched, how many people have been blessed, how many people have been renewed by this ministry and by this church. It's time for, when we moved here, I kept preaching, it's time to grow up. When you're 8, because we were 8 when we moved here. When you're 8 years old, you can start cutting your own food. You can start doing your own thing. Now we're 10, okay? What are we being called to do? What are we being called to do at 11? Missionally, what are we being called to do? I think God does everything for a reason. I love Everett. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Part of the reason I met with Ruth this week before her surgery, part of the reason I believe I'm there is because I'm learning real time, what does it mean to steward a building? What is it like to steward major services that feed over 200 people and do day centers for homeless folks in the community? What does it mean to start having love bags that sit in an office so that anybody can stop by, can pick up one? What does it mean to vision? What do you do with the building? What does it mean to speak to an opiate and a housing crisis in the midst of a city where many of the churches are starting to close their doors and put larger than life no trespassing signs? Mm-hmm. And you're called to say, I think our doors aren't open wide enough, God. So help us do that. Part of my reason is to bless that congregation and give them whatever talents. But the other part of that bargain was that we were supposed to be learning, getting ideas, getting vision points for our future as a church.
Right.
I don't believe that this infusion of $80,000, hopefully over the next 3 years, if we keep renewing this, is the end. But I believe it's a financial life shot into us. And I believe that the decisions we make in the history of this church over the next few years will determine who we are 15, 20, and 25 years from now. I wish I could tell you that 10 years after Liberation started, there were 5 other churches like us. And people have now a choice if they want to have a church that believes in the movement of the Spirit of God in a multicultural context. I wish I could tell you that. I wish I could tell you that congregations on Sunday in the UCC look like this one, and they don't. Mm-hmm. And I have to hear that as God saying, Liberation, your work is not done.
Yes.
Your call in ministry has not been completely fulfilled. There's more labor and there's more work to do. And I'm now going to give you some more fiscal money to be able to do that. The visions of what we have for the money is thinking about things like how do we fully fund Feed 50 from a baseline part of who we are as a church, so that instead of wondering month to month how we will keep it running, we're wondering how to build it beyond where we are. When we think about taking people in communities who never got a chance to experience the environment, never got a chance to be at the ocean, never had an opportunity to safely reflect on their spirituality, and we're called to do that in this community, that 10 and 15 years later, people will still have in their closet a word where we all wrote a meaningful word for them, and I've gone to people's houses and they have them hanging in their houses years later. So we should be thinking about, well, how do we maintain the church retreat that we need to now rebirth? My question is, how do we do that in our communities multiple times a year? That people get to go away, critically reflect on their spirituality, and have members of this church facilitate various workshops for them so that they grow. Financially, they grow. Spiritually, they grow. In their racial identity development, they grow. And how to communicate and talk to one another. Why should we not be that church? Why should we not be the church that gets our ducks in a row, that our youth have a safe place to go in the summer and learn painting and music and piano and violin and all of these different things? Why should Liberation not be that? And at some point, why should we not have so many things going on that we realize we would not be a good steward to keep renting somebody else's building, and we need to start looking for a space that is our own? Mm-hmm. I'm not asking you to invest in what we've done, because we've done it. It's in the history books. It's in the laurels of who we have been as a church. It is the foundation whereby which the grant was even offered. I'm not inviting you to invest in that because you can't. It's already happened. But what I am inviting you is to invest in the next 10 years of who we are as a congregation. What are we building? What are we seeding? What are we investing in so that it is not a fictitious dream, but it is a reality? When we decided to go for the grant, we decided that we would take a risk and no longer play it small. As an insider who helped to write the grant application, I knew that the level of recruitment and the strategic outreach for this year would make it one of the hardest years that any church has ever applied for this grant. And I knew part of our faith narrative was, do we believe God enough to, in the hardest year to get this grant, to trust that it is the perfect year for us? I think we serve a God who loves the impossible.
Oh, yes.
When we make our minds up about why it won't work and all of the barriers and all of the consolation prizes we'll give ourselves just in case it doesn't, God is like, yeah, go ahead. I've already made a way.
Yes.
I found out today that not only do we get the grant of $40,000, but they're going to give us additional money. The additional money is going to be able to pay for Liberation over the next 18 months to have intensive coaching from the Center for Progressive Renewal.
Wow.
They'll do 7 classes that we can buy into. They will do a personal 4 times over the year counseling sessions with me as the pastor. They'll do other things for the leadership team. All of the things in place to help us steward the funds and our own vitality in a significant way. I will tell you, the private one-on-one coaching is worth about $3,000, just for me as the pastor to be able to talk to them 4 times a year. That's $3,000. So then add 8 classes that are about $500 to $1,000 a piece that they're giving us also for free. We're already at $11,000 of investment
Wow.
in our church right there. And then there's a host of other things in the letter that I don't even know exactly what it means yet, but I know it ain't free. And so they said that our first check from them, we should see it with more money than the grant. I mean, in terms of what they're supposed to be giving us, because they're going to be giving us the money so that we can steward paying the coaches and everything else out of the money that's given to us.
Oh my God.
The Holy Spirit has chosen this moment. This moment. This moment. And if the Holy Spirit has chosen this moment for the organization doesn't exist without you. Which also therefore means, if you're willing to take the risk, the Holy Spirit has chosen you to be a part of this moment in the history of this church. I can't make any of you do any particular thing with that. I can only encourage you to not be the man who got that $1,000 and hid it. Hid it and buried it and waited until God was like, so what'd you do? I don't want to take $40,000 and bury it. Keep doing business as usual, act based on scarcity, make sure that, okay, well, we just want to survive. I don't want to survive. We've done that for 10 years. We've survived. We've actually made it happen. The next level, though, is thriving. Thriving. Things that generate its own income, things that generate our future, things that generate new life and new people and new energy. We can do all of that together. Not just because I'm saying it, but because we would have died had it not been the case. We would have. Churches are dying every Sunday. No matter how many people they had, no matter the big buildings they have, no matter whatever. Something about the spark of vision dissipates. And people realize, this isn't for me. And it doesn't seem like that's happening here. If anything, this church continues to inspire other people all over the world.
True that.
So today we hold in thanksgiving what God has blessed us with, and it's a challenge to each of you to figure out in a very tangible, poignant way, how will I tithe not only my presence, but I will tithe my time and my talent, and then I will tithe financially. The money matching, I believe that God will help us to do that with your gifts, but that means you'll have to be intentional about the gifts. The beautiful thing about the money is you don't get it unless we send in receipts of the amount of money that we are depositing in our church account. And I really like that because it basically says instead of a handout, we want to show you what's already in the room of your congregation.
Right.
Everybody reading looked at other churches' budgets, other churches' realities, and said, wow, we believe Liberation can do it. So we're going to give you the money in good faith. And we will not give it to a different organization because we trust you're going to do and be about who you said you are. So I think we can do that. But I also don't want us to get caught up in the $40,000 like that is Jesus.
Yes.
Right? Because at some point, we may not be renewed for the 3 years, but even if we are, it ends at 3 years. So they're hoping that we have built the capacity as a church, that we become gangbusters in giving, that we know what our missional, operational point is, and that we invest in it. We invest in our youth, we invest in the populations that are near and dear to us, people who are homeless, people who do not have something to eat, people who don't have shelter, that we think critically about our youth who don't have any place to go in the summers, and so they're in the streets in the Central District and every place else, and this church is sitting here with, I think, an open obligation to say, okay, God, here we are. Let's open up our arms. And so in the myriad of people who call this church and ask, hey, I'm in this situation, I'm stuck here, I'm in the middle of this, what will we do? God, what would it be like if we could offer job training classes here? What would it mean if we didn't just go to the Compass Housing Alliance once a month? When they basically have told me that they actually need people every day of the month. They do a drop-in center every day of the month, 365 or 66 in a leap year days of the year. And so the email that I got back this past month of saying, oh my God, your church does not realize how significant it is that you come and that you've even planned a date in December. Oh my gosh.
Oh.
They don't have a list of churches and organizations knocking down their door to help this particular population. So she wrote a personal note of thanks to us when we're dropping off 50 meals once a month.
For more than 50.
We can do even bigger than that. That's what we're called to do, and that's the seedling that's planted here. Other people are so inspired by the fact that we're giving socks and hats and gloves and all of this kind of stuff. This little church that you may come in on Sunday and go, okay, what y'all really doing? We're blessing people. There are people walking around Seattle right now with thicker, warmer socks, a nice bling hat that somebody bought with the gray and everything else, and some nice gloves. And they may not know Liberation UCC, but they know that God brought something to them. They read the little note that you gave. So think about that. Think about how you want to be invested in that. Of course, in the midst of thinking about that for stewardship, today we also have these little sheets, which are going to come. But anyway, there's these little sheets. Oh, you have it. Okay. There's these, I don't think that's it.
Yep.
No, there's cutoff.
Should be up there by your,
See, we need a community. So anyway, I haven't had to do this in so long, and that's actually a testimony to how you have all been. We are finally at a place where literally, probably about March until now, we have finally run out of all of the plates and the silverware and everything that we have for Feed 50. I celebrate that because I haven't had to come and ask you all for it, because without saying anything, you have continuously stopped by with forks and knives and napkins. People have stopped by with the containers that everything has to go in, or you're dropping off rice, or you're bringing whatever. So praise be to God that it is December, and this is the first time that I'm asking for people to take these sheets again. On each one of these sheets, there is one is for a 100-pack of silverware. It's $12.39 at cash and carry. The other one is for the food containers with the 3 compartments, and a 100-pack is $17. Hillary has even rounded up the tax for you, so you know exactly how much it is. So it's $7.18. I'm going to leave these up here during offering time, so please feel free to come and take care of it. Fortunately, we're only going to do this for the next few months with the containers. The goal with Compass Housing is that ultimately we'll start making enough food that we'll stay there and serve it.
oh,
And we can be in communion with folks as well. We're doing a dry run through December because we don't know the numbers yet, and it's still fairly new that they're even allowing this kind of relationship. So they're going to be counting, we're going to be counting probably through February-ish, which is why we're saying I think there's just 2 of each of these. That'll give us 4 more months worth of, we give a little bit extra each time. But by March of next year, the hope is to simply be able to make enough food that's for more than 50 people, be able to bring it, drop it off, and then we'll spend the first hour serving, hanging out with folks, leave whatever else is there. And so what we'll be collecting next year will just be the pans, and then maybe some giveaway servingware, so that we're just making the food, dropping it off. The meal goes well, they like the contents of it, it seemingly works for most people that come, so it hasn't been an issue in that regard. We just need a greater production. The last thing I'll say about this is that I'm really excited that we've agreed, Madrona and Kadima, to partner with Liberation to one of the Saturdays over the summer, double or quadruple the amount of people that we want to bless. And so our goal is to be able to drop off, the 70+ meals there, but also because it's 3 of our churches working together to also pick 2 tent cities to donate to, as well as another 50 to 70 people that we go out into the neighborhood. So on that day, 200 to 300 people can be fed a hot meal because of the work of our 3 congregations here.
nice.
And to make that an annual thing that Liberation, Kadima, and Madrona always invest in together. This is the work of your church.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen.
This is the work of all of you. Let's pray before we collect our offering. God, we will come up with reasons that we can, and sometimes reasons that we can't.
Yes.
We will see the limitation even before it grows in our minds. We will
Yes.
already start building it. So I ask you to let your spirit blow down our Legos right now. as we come up with all of the reasons and myriad of things, as we start thinking about everything fiscally we have to take responsibility for, and it seems like we're going to bury what you've given us. Teach us, God, that you are not a God of lack, that you are not a God of emptiness, but you are a God of fullness. Bless us, stretch us, anoint us, that as we decide what we'll steward as a church this year, we do it through the leading and the guidance of the Holy Spirit that is often without limits, often full of wonder, and never puts us in a situation where we will struggle as opposed to thrive. These things we trust you for. In Jesus' name.